Due to recent books and movies, the public has been made aware of various secret groups and organizations such as the Freemasons and Knights Templars. One group you won't hear of, however, is the Knights of the Golden Circle, more commonly referred to as the KGC. We have with us today Floyd Mann. He's been a researcher for the last 8 years on the KGC. He's also LostTreasuresUSA.com website. He'll be talking about the facts and fiction of the KGC and his findings relating to them. Floyd.
A few thank yous. Number one is to the Foundation for inviting me here to speak on what I really like to talk about, which is treasure hunting, but basically KGC treasure. Secondary, I'd like to thank my wife for letting me come out and play with the other boys and girls. She's been very good about that for the 5 years that we've been married. And thirdly, I'd like to thank the audience for not all of you leaving and heading out the front door when you hear a treasure hunter get up here. Today I'll be speaking on the KGC, and I'll explain what the KGC is in a few minutes. A brief introduction about me and who the heck Floyd Mann is. I'm 51, married, living in West Valley City. Up until about a year ago, I was traveling around the United States with my wife in our motorhome. Got to see a lot of treasure sites. I'll be 51 next Saturday, so I've been retired for 7 years now. Retired at 44 and became a full-time researcher, full-time amateur treasure hunter. But I got introduced to the hobby about 34 years ago when I was 17 years old, and I've been having a blast since then. My wife is very supportive of my activities, doesn't quite understand what I do, but she lives with me. You know, some people ask, well, what are my qualifications? Well, I don't have a college degree and I haven't written a book yet. Maybe those things will come in time if they become important to me. My number one qualification probably is the fact that I'm willing to share my information, my knowledge, and my insight on the KGC and other treasure hunting activities. Whereas a lot of others that probably know more about the KGC than I do are pretty closed-mouthed. In fact, some of them just hate me for the fact that I'm putting my information out there. But I can live with that. I spend a lot of time, money, and effort accumulating information on this KGC, which is really not a well-known group. I can help you if you need my assistance. No charge. My services are free. I have free resources that can help you. I have a great reference library. I have 4,000 treasure-type magazines that are nice. I currently have 3 forums and a free twice-monthly newsletter that goes out to about 5,000 readers. It's an email e-zine, and I got people from across the world that read it, and they seem to enjoy it. I've been researching the KGC for about 8 years, and I've learned a lot, and I can save you a lot of time and money and effort. But I will say I'm not an expert, and I'm not probably a real good teacher. I'm just a person that has a lot of information and willing to share it. Now, most of what I'll share with you today is historical fact, even though our high school history books did not tell us the truth on some subjects, as has been evidenced so far today. Most of my comments can be verified on at least one different source. Some sources maybe have 5 or 6 that will back me up. Occasionally, I'll inject my opinion, and that will be based upon my research and experience. You will even hear me contradict myself a few times today, because there are equal amounts of people that believe in the KGC and that they hid billions of dollars in just the United States alone, but then there are equal amounts of people that say baloney or hogwash. I'll be quoting from various references. Today's presentation will be a real quick overview or introduction to the KGC, and afterwards you can decide if you want to hunt for their treasures. I'll be squeezing 150 years of history in less than 30 minutes. Now, a couple of quotes from my introduction that was posted on the internet for this symposium. What is the KGC? That stands for Knights of the Golden Circle. You've never heard of them? Most treasure hunters have not. Just recently, in the last couple of years, it's become kind of thing that people have become aware of, and people are willing to start saying, well, maybe they did exist, maybe there are billions of dollars out there to be found. When I learned about the KGC about 8 years ago, I was just surfing through a TreasureNet forum, saw a guy named Hillbilly Bob Brewer talking about it, and I thought, well, that sounds kind of interesting. I never heard about that, and that's where I got my start, was reading on the forums. The KGC were, or the question mark is, are, a very secretive and mysterious organization. And personally, I'm convinced that the Order of Masons, which is known as the Freemasons, influenced the KGC and their methods of operation greatly. You have the KGC, you have the Masons, you have the Templars, and then you get a little maybe far-fetched, maybe not, you got the Illuminati, you got the Brotherhood, you got conspiracies, and you have world domination. Are they all somehow related? We'll look at that in a little bit. Most stories about the KGC concern the fact that they were just a group of loyal Confederate sympathizers, and they were stashing loot and supplies to get ready for a second Civil War, which they planned to win. The South shall rise again. I believe that this cover story was kind of a misleading thing. It was kind of what we call a red herring. If there are KGC depositories throughout the United States and throughout the world, today they would be worth trillions of dollars, and that's trillions with a T. Members of the KGC included the Jesse James gang and several other outlaw gangs. You had Quantrell, and they recruited a lot of Indians, blacks, outlaws, and of course, government officials. The KGC may have hidden tons of treasures throughout the United States. Their maps and their waybills and their stories have started to circulate pretty good in the last couple of years. They had secret signs and symbols, which only a few treasure hunters that I know of are able to interpret and decipher. And we may never know the full history of the KGC, but more and more papers and documents are being discovered every year. The question is, does the KGC history go back 150 years, or does it go back hundreds of years? Is world domination what they were really after, or was it just to win the Second Civil War? This presentation will give you just a very brief outline of the KGC. This is the home page of my website. On this particular website, I have lots of information that you can go to. There's hundreds of links, and they'll take you to hundreds more links. There's so much information on that site that I have not myself even looked at about 25% of the linked websites. I made sure that they were valid, that they contained what I called valid KGC information. So I want you to enjoy your adventure there by accessing that site. Last November, a movie came out called National Treasure. And I've seen it twice, and I enjoy it, but I consider it basically as good entertainment and an escape from reality for about 2 hours. Is this movie related to the KGC? Well, maybe a little bit, but only because the Masons and the Templars are mentioned in that movie. National Treasure deals with a treasure hunter, that's Nicolas Cage, of course, and he must confront a series of puzzles, secret codes, and hidden messages from America's past in order to protect our country's most sacred document, the Declaration of Independence. And in the meantime, he'd like to uncover the extraordinary treasure to which it leads. Is National Treasure fact or fiction? Fiction, excuse me. Well, the fact is, on the Knights Templar, this secret warrior society was known as the Knights Templar. They excavated for 10 years at the Temple of Solomon. Within 2 centuries, they became one of the most popular, powerful, and wealthy groups in Europe. And that led many people to believe that they must have amassed an enormous treasure. It was said that the Knights met their end at the hands of the Pope and King Philip of France in 1307. Well, they packed up all their booty, supposedly, and headed out on the boats. Some people believe that they ended up on Nova Scotia's island, which is, the big hole there is called the Money Pit, or some people call it the Treasure Pit. Some people believe that that is where the Knights Templar treasure ended up. Christopher Columbus also had connections to the Knights of Christ, which was an offshoot of the Knights Templar, so he too could have played a role in this mystery. The fiction part of that is, nobody knows if the Knights Templar treasure exists or where it lies today. In National Treasure, the filmmakers imagined that it fell into the hands of our America's founding fathers, and they cleverly hid it until it was found or not at a later time. Then the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, that was published after National Treasure was already in the works. He kind of was hinting at a Knights Templar treasure also. In the movie, of course, we also mentioned the Freemasons, a heavy topic. There is a fact that the Freemasons, they evolved from the remnants of the Knights Templar. They started as a loose association of medieval architects, and they became an influential fraternity of the best and brightest men in Europe, known for their secrecy as well as their wealth and power. In the movie, the all-seeing eye and the unfinished pyramid on the U.S. dollar, those are Freemason symbols. Unfortunately, that is misleading. The Freemasons did not adopt those two symbols until 14 years after the dollar bill, the Great Seal, was adopted by our founding fathers. There's some people that say that the Masons also, with their codes and everything, laid out the city of Washington, D.C. It's laid out in a grid concept of the Freemasons, supposedly in the mystical shape of the Virgo constellation. I look at that, I somewhat see it, but I also see some other formats there also. The Freemasons did have cryptic symbols, and they did have it a lot on their buildings, and it led a lot to this gentleman looking for the treasure in the movie. Fact and fiction regarding the codes and ciphers. Codes and ciphers have been around for a long, long time, since biblical times, and they were used extensively through the Revolutionary War and by our founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson was fascinated by cryptology, and he invented a device for encoding messages that was known as the Jefferson cylinder. The Freemasons also had their standard code. It's called the Pigpen Code, is what you might have heard it called, the Pigpen cipher. It's also called the Copeland Code. The use of invisible ink, such as in the movie, that was documented during the Revolutionary War. And we still have some keys, some codes that cannot be broken because we don't know what the keys are. As far as the fiction part in National Treasure, there are secret symbols from our past that were in that movie, supposedly messages from our founding fathers on this hidden treasure. There was a special pair of decoding glasses, supposedly designed by Benjamin Franklin. Although Benjamin Franklin was an inventor and he invented the first bifocals, those strategic spectacles were just a figment of the imagination of the National Treasure screenwriters. A fact on the Declaration of Independence. It was July 4th, 1776. Nobody on the committee that was committing treason by drafting the Declaration of Independence were known to be Masons. Some of them became Masons after the fact. In National Treasure, some fiction would be Ben Gates, who is Nicolas Cage, of course. He set out to do the unthinkable. He wanted to steal the Declaration of Independence in the hopes that he could save it from the evil guy. Well, with the the movie directors, they talked to some security people. They got some ideas how it could be done, but the point is they don't want you to attempt that because you won't be successful. Now, while this movie does contain a few inconsistencies, which is not really uncommon in today's movies, I think it was an entertaining story. Our heroes search for the big treasure below the city. In real life, the search continues, mainly at Nova Scotia's Oak Island, and more recently, in the news, you've got the Bruton Vault in Williamsburg, Virginia. And the Rockefellers are so convinced that that is where the treasure is that they've bought the whole town, so they're pretty much going to go into the treasure hunting business, I believe. The Templars and the Masons were the fathers of the KGC, the Knights of the Golden Circle, and if some of the stories about the huge depositories of the KGC are true, there are some huge treasures yet to be discovered. This is the sign of the Masons. It's called the square and the compass. It's probably the most recognized symbol of the Masons. It adorns their buildings, their flags, their jewelry, their stationery. When we research the KGC, we keep coming across many references to the influence of the Masons on the KGC, and we find out that most, if not all, of the top-ranked officers of the KGC were Masons. Now, there are thousands and thousands and thousands of pages of information on the internet and in publication about the KGC, about the Masons, Templars, Illuminati, conspiracies, and just how they all might be related. And I can't get into that too much because we just don't have enough time. But some of the thoughts regarding these groups are the Knights of the Golden Circle, which I'll refer to as the KGC through most of this presentation. They were a somewhat secret organization. They sought to establish a slave empire that would encompass the southern United States, the West Indies, Mexico, and Central America. This area is about 2,400 miles in diameter, hence the name Golden Circle. The peak of the KGC activity seems to be between the years 1854 and 1864, but of course there are many claims and stories that the group still continued their activities into the early 1900s. The total membership probably maxed out at about 300,000. Basically, this was a Confederate group trying to help the South win the Civil War even before it started, and then they continued during the war, and after the war they decided we better start stashing some supplies, some gold. We're going to finance the next Civil War, which of course they hope to win. The KGC also figured into the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth was a KGC agent. The KGC later became known as Oak, like the oak tree, the Order of American Knights. After that, they were called the Sons of Liberty. Basically, the KGC was the secret money-acquiring unit of the Confederacy. They were the Confederate Secret Service. Their job, start rounding up funds for future operations, robbing Union payroll trains and mints, bank robberies, all these were added to their caches. After the war, the Confederate Treasury was added to their caches. And then investments started being made with these monies. Immense profits were made, and these monies were stashed. There was also a group called the Copperheads. They were a secret order of Southern sympathizers, and they contributed some members to the KGC. They were basically a northern group that were loyal to the Confederacy. You have the KKK, which was the Ku Klux Klan. They evolved out of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry and the KGC. It appears that all the groups I just mentioned were influenced by the Masons. Brief history, of course, the Masons today are still around. They're not such a secret group. The earliest that we know that the Masons existed was right around 1400, but it's thought that they may have existed before then. Today they continue their good work as far as donating to charitable causes. Now, it is believed that it was one of the organizations most responsible for spreading the ideals of the Enlightenment, the dignity of man and the liberty of the individual, the right of all persons to worship as they chose, the formation of democratic governments, and the importance of public education. The Masons supported the first public schools in both Europe and America. Today they donate about $1.5 million each day to their causes that they've chosen. Of course, no discussion of Masonry would be complete without mentioning Albert Pike. That slide will change eventually. Albert Pike was a top-ranking Mason and leader of the KGC. He was a crusader for justice for Native Americans, a journalist, philosopher, lawyer, and Civil War general. For many years, he was a leader of the Scottish Rite Masons in the southern United States, and he was the author of quite a thick book called Morals and Dogma, published in 1871. That's basically lists all the basic philosophies of Masonry. And if you want a good bedside book to put you to sleep, that would be the one. And in the movie, of course, I mentioned that the eye and the pyramid were all on the back of the dollar. They became Masonic after the dollar bill was in circulation for about 14 years. Many Masonic symbols are used in KGC codes, maps, and waybills today, which we'll show a few of those a little bit later. Many of the miners and the vault builders that were building these depositories for the KGC were Masons. Now we have Freemasonry shows up a lot in our culture, movies, TV, books. I mean, after all, they've been around for 600 years. Something that's that long lasting is bound to roll over into our culture. Many of today's movies have casual mentions that point to Masonry. Some brief examples would be In Sunday with Al Pacino. You had First Night with Sean Connery. And I have a list of about 25 other movies that point to Masonry being so important in our culture. Some of the TV shows are In the Heat of the Night with O'Connor. And, of course, you got The Simpsons. We have the books, The Da Vinci Code, Sherlock Holmes, and War and Peace. And lately we have 7 or 8 songs, mostly rap songs, that make good references to the Masons. And just a little bit I read on the internet just a couple days ago, just before the new Pope was elected, he was investigating the Templars. They're still around. They're headquartered in England. He's trying to decide whether the church will issue an apology to the Templars for basically running them out of Europe. So we may hear about that probably in the upcoming months. There's another group that some people seem to be concerned about. They think that conspiracy theory that the United States is going to be overrun, and the KGC supposedly is an arm of a group that is called the Illuminati. And most conspiracists think that the Illuminati is basically an elite group of European bankers, and they're getting together for evil purposes and to control our world. A satanic plot for one world government, and they want to keep all the KGC caches. They think that's their money. So far, I haven't been real concerned with them bothering me while I go about looking for my KGC loot. Okay, moving forward in time. Kind of a background history there on the KGC and the Masons. Pretty cut and dried. Actually, I was about bored to tears myself on it. I like to get on to the important stuff, the exciting stuff. If the KGC really did hide billions of dollars or trillions of dollars, where is it? And how can we find some of it? This book is Shadow of the Sentinel. Subtitle is One Man's Quest to Find the Hidden Treasure of the Confederacy. When this book came out several years ago, this was for many people their introduction to the KGC. I consider this book a good first book to read and study if you want to learn some of the basics about KGC treasure hunting. Recently, the paperback version of this book came out, and it's called Rebel Gold, so you don't need to buy both of them if you don't want. This hardcover version is available on the internet for just a couple of bucks now, actually cheaper than the paperback. And this is a comprehensive account of the KGC after the Civil War into the 1900s. There are some clues on how to decipher KGC codes and ciphers, and the author points out that they are heavily associated with the Freemasons. The slide I wanted to talk about was called Jesse James Was One of His Names. This book is a pretty rare book. It's referred to as the Black Book among treasure hunters because of the black cover, and most people that are treasure hunting for KGC consider that their Bible, a must-have reference source. I constantly refer back to my copy, and I'm still trying to figure out some of the stories in there. It was copyrighted in '75 by a newspaper reporter named Dale Schrader and a guy that called himself Jesse James III. His real name was Orvis Hauk. The subtitle for that book is The Greatest Cover-Up in History by the Famous Outlaw Who Lived 73 Incredible Lives. This book proposes that Jesse James was not killed in 1882 and that he was age 107 and died in 1951. During this time is when he supposedly ran the KGC operation. For some reason, even though I enjoy the heck out of that book, every time I read it, and I've read it about 8 times, I think of the movie Forrest Gump. If you remember all the things that Forrest did and all the situations he got into and how far-fetched some of them were, that might come to you also. Now, supposedly, for 70 years after death, Jesse James ran around the country, and during that time, he used over 70 aliases. You must read this book if you want to be fully informed on KGC treasures, because most of the stories and articles that have been written in the last 30 years refer back to that book or are loosely based on that book. That rare book, that was on the slide before this one, it sells for about $350 if you can find one. I suggest you for free. This particular slide right here, this is called the United States Treasure Atlas, and pictured here is Volume 2, which covers the states of California and Colorado. It has many, many KGC references throughout it in quite a few of the states. Plus a lot of references to Confederate and Civil War treasures that sound suspiciously like KGC. These 10 volumes are worth having. They retail for about $115, and you'll have about 50,000 other treasure leads if you're not particularly interested in KGC. Oklahoma Treasures and Treasure Tales by Steve Wilson. He's an Oklahoma boy, actually a professor if I recall right. I like this 325-page book because it has a lot of good treasure stories, including the Jesse James information. There are a few stories that seem to be KGC related, even though the author does not mention them anywhere in this book. Some of the stories match areas where KGC deposits should be. It's very well written and has lots of great photos. Spider Rock Mystery of Lost Spanish Gold by the same author, Steve Wilson. This just recently came out. It's a completely different book than what I anticipated when I started reading it. I'm impressed with the documentation and research that this man puts into his treasure story. Quite a few people are trying to make this Spider Rock treasure a KGC treasure. But in my opinion, it's too old to be KGC. All of the copper artifacts that were found associated with the 3 Spider Rocks found so far are way too old and to be KGC. Plus, the KGC were known to use metal clues, not necessarily copper. This would have been the first I've ever heard of copper being used in a KGC story. I recommend this book if you want to learn about perseverance, persistence, and some research ideas. This slide you can see at the top are the 3 Spider Rocks. They were found in an area in central Texas near Rotan, Aspermont, and Clyde. Right after the century, about 1900 to 1907, was when people started really looking for this treasure. Because there's a Spider Rock formation on these rocks, which is very similar to a KGC template that's floating around, people are wondering, could it possibly be KGC? I think there's more rocks waiting to be found, or they've been found and they weren't recognized for what they were. There we go. Okay, these are called the Peralta stones. This just shows 2 of the stones that were found in Arizona. In the first book I pictured, Shadow the Sentinel by Brewer and Gettler. They're working on trying to see if these stones are KGC related. My opinion, based upon what I've been researching, is that while they may be in a KGC depository area, in the area depicted by these stones, that will be a coincidence. The KGC are suspected to have acquired buried ancient treasure and or Spanish treasure caches, but I believe that these stones predate the KGC. Some people ask, well, what about the Lost Dutchman mine? Was there really ever such a mine? You got tens and thousands of people have been looking at it for years and years and years. Supposedly has not been found. One theory proposed is that maybe the Dutchman has stumbled upon a KGC depository and he was just dipping into that for his gold. Sounds a little bit better though to say you found a gold mine. How about the Oak Island money pit? Was it KGC? Probably not, but a lot of evidence points to the unrecovered treasure hidden there to be Knights Templar. Pictures of the Freemasons. The Masons might have been involved, but I doubt that the KGC were. Okay, I'm going to leave it there well enough alone. There was a little map. It was basically a very cryptic, what I call a puzzle more than a map. For 35 years, people have been trying to figure out what this was. It first showed up that most people became aware of in Carl von Mueller's book, his treasure hunting manual. There's many people that said it was around way before that. Thousands have tried to solve the thing, and a few claim to have solved it and have actually said to have taken some of the loot. Most people will agree that that map will take you to Colorado or New Mexico. The slide on the screen now, I think, is a must-read article if you want both sides of the KGC. You got the black book that claims that Jesse James lived to 107, faked everybody out for years, ran the KGC. This particular article appeared in the February issue of True West magazine. Pictured on the screen, you have older versions of Cole Younger, Billy the Kid, and Jesse James. And we were told that all these guys died at a relatively young age. So we up with that then. Well, the black book leads us to believe that there's the distinct possibility that Jesse James and other people faked their deaths so they could continue doing what they liked the most, and that was robbing and contributing to the KGC effort. Article, quite a few more pictures showing how all these guys were a hoax. Hey, a slide worked. Who were the leaders of the KGC? This slide here is Albert Pike. He was the brain power behind the KGC, a high-ranking Mason. He supposedly masterminded the placement of most of the big KGC depositories. Jesse James supposedly was the money man, the comptroller of the KGC, and after Quantrill died, he became the leader, if we are convinced he did not die in 1882. Of course, even if he did die in 1882, he still had a good 20 years where he could have been a major player in the KGC. Frank James, brother of G, also a member of the KGC. One of the rare pictures of Quantrill. He didn't like his picture taken very much. He was the real leader of the KGC, and after he died, Jesse supposedly took over. Here's old man Jesse. He claims that he was the main man of the KGC. When he died in 1951, he was going under the alias before he came out of the closet, so to speak. He was going under the name of J. Frank Dalton, J standing for Jesse, Frank for his brother, Dalton his mother's maiden name, according to him. Those are 5 of the leaders of the KGC as we know it. There was supposedly an inner circle of 12, including a couple of generals, a couple of high-ranking Confederate guys, one of them even being Jefferson Davis. In the black book, the Jesse James was one of his names. He started listing some of the treasures. Now this supposedly was dictated to him by Jesse James or J. Frank Dalton as here's where we get our money. He started off with code A, and I got 8 slides here, A through G, that lists some of the depositories. Code A here is they start off with this, and he says, imagine what I could have showed you if I would list codes H through Z. These 99 caches from no amount listed to over $55 million listed. These are assumed to be when they were hidden between 18 and 1900. More of them there. Of course, you won't be able to read all these. All these are available. If you want them from me, just let me know and I'll email them to you. A lot of them there on Code E. All of these depositories would be worth trillions of dollars today if they do exist. Most of the major KGC depositories will, of course, be booby-trapped. Good luck on your research. This slide here, this depicts some of the totals listed. These are 1975 figures of what they claim was put down in the United States and in other countries. In Nevada and Utah, for example, they had about $330 million hidden in 1975 values. Any of you that are somewhat informed about the KGCs have seen this, what we call a template. This is usually on clear plastic so you can see through it. It's meant to be put down on a topo map. There's very few circulating around. There's different variations. This was in Hillbilly's book. He calls it a template. It's to solve a KGC depository layout. This is the template that most KGC people are playing with right now, including myself. Supposedly the center square deposit. The outlying 28 other circles, stars, and squares are smaller caches, although they would still be quite substantial. It's unknown, of course, until somebody opens one of these depositories, how big of an area this will cover. It's been hinted that some of these depositories would be spread over 40 square miles. I'm working on several different ones in several different states that I think will be 2 miles by 2 miles. That'd make you dizzy. In November 1993, the confidential newsletter called Treasure Hunter Confidential published a report. It tells of a KGC in southern Utah. It says that the cache was about $350,000, but more importantly, contained maps to other KGC depositories. This slide here is a KGC map rock in central Utah. Many variations on the Ancient Lost Treasures forum. They have quite a discussion on what all these signs mean. You can't read this, but it's a printout sheet they got to people. Basically, I say take this with you when you're on your field trips. These are things you want to look for, such as a radiant sun, trees that are in weird shapes, giant rock carvings or shapes, animals, right on down the line. We mentioned the Pigpen code, that's also known as the Copeland code. A lot of your KGC rock maps that we've come across will have some of these letters. Basically, it's just a supplementation. Exchange the letter A for a certain symbol. That was the code. Fairly simple once you knew what the key was. You can't read this, but basically, my point in putting this up there was, this newspaper clipping appeared in the Nashville Banner in 1876. I was told in an email from Hillbilly Bob Brewer, who I'll take his word for it, that this is a code. KGC would communicate with each other through newspapers. It was the easiest way to get the word. If we were to read this, we see there's an awful lot of numbers in there, a lot of directions. For this just to be a piece of gossip put in the paper, it seems to be pretty much detailed. I think the common thought among KGC researchers is that it's telling you where the Tennessee depository is. And most people think the Tennessee depository is the largest in the United States. This is a 289-page manuscript that I have in my files. It is given to me by a guy that has not published it yet. I've read it. It gives me convincing data that Quantrell did not die when he was recorded to have died. He lived for many years thereafter and was still active in the KGC. So there are people, this particular guy was a detective, and he spent many years putting his research together. There are a lot of people out there that suspect that our history books are just plain wrong. There's a lot of articles out there on the KGC. I'm going to flip through about 17 slides here. Basically, these are just the titles of some references. I have all of these. They're available to you, or if you want a photocopy, just let me know. That was in 1862 or 64. It was an exposure of the KGC. That was about the time they had to change their name, because all of a sudden people now were aware of their secret handshakes and symbols that they were using. Lots of articles in the treasure magazines. Here's one. It was Incredible Knights of the Golden Circle. Millions hoarded for the Second Civil War. Most of these guys were reputable treasure hunters. Howard Duffy, Dorian Cook. They listed references and a bibliography with most of their articles showing that they believed that the KGC had stashed millions and billions of dollars. The Confederate secret agenda. The Knights of the Golden Circle had plans for the Confederacy. These are cropped, just the titles. I didn't want to put the full article up there. Tennessee, Mark of the Golden Circle. That was one of their main headquarters, was Nashville. In fact, where the Grand Ole Opry was is one of their headquarters. The circle is unbroken. The Confederate Knights cache. Again, on the Tennessee cache. We have the Knights of the Golden Circle articles. There's $150 billion in Confederate gold, wrote the National Tatler. Maybe not your best. The author of that was at that time. Dorian Cook was a columnist for one of the treasure magazines. He wrote a long series on the KGC, and I'll flip through some of those. Jesse James, The Final Alias. More on the Golden Circle. The red hand means danger. Some of the, what I call the rock people that have talked today, we're talking about the red hand. If you see a red hand, I would say assume that that means danger, because you don't know if you're looking at an ancient site or a booby-trapped KGC site. 1982. Was it Jesse James, or was his look-alike, which everybody said was a dead ringer for him? His evil cousin, Charlie Bigelow, is what most people will tell you. $100 billion in treasure from the LA Examiner. The Golden Circle, this came from the Treasure Hunter Confidential, which was about $100 a year for that particular newsletter. They had a series of quite a few KGC articles. This particular one, he's telling about a group that claimed that they uncovered 6 of the KGC caches. I wrote in 1862 exposing them. Some of the Union government would put spies into the KGC. They were basically reporting back to the Union. Sometimes the Union government would know what the Confederates were doing before they even did. Edmund Wright, his adventures with and his escape from the Knights of the Golden Circle. He was one of the spies. Treasure Hunter Confidential again, from 1989 to 1999, produced their newsletter. It kind of went downhill after that, although I heard that it was still around for a year or two. I've got 10 years of these newsletters. I've pulled out about 17 or 18 articles that are pretty good on the KGC. This is a rendition of what's called a typical hoot owl tree. This is autographed down at the bottom by Jesse James III in 1982. He's saying that the KGC deformed trees and made markers or guides to treasure. You're on the trail to treasure if you're following these trees. Some of them were grafted. Some are bent over young age and formed. Unfortunately, the Indians did this to a lot of trees, basically marking the Trail of Tears when they were forced out of the southern United States over Indian territory in Oklahoma. So you're going to run into KGC hoot owl trees and Indian trees mixed together, sometimes on the same route. Again, not a whole lot of detail. Most of them show that they go down about 200 feet. Most of them are going to be impossible to open. Most of them contain not just tons of treasure, but hundreds or thousands of tons of treasure. Starting to wind up here. I suggest if you want to learn more about the KGC, go get all the free information you can. I try not to pay for anything, and you shouldn't either, I guess. I have a free website you can go to. I have 20,000 magazine articles that you can go to, find a title. If you want an article, just email me, I'll send it to you. I have a free newsletter, comes out twice a month. Ask me for that, I'll put you on the list. Typical newsletter comes, if you were to print it out, there are 5 or 6 pages, usually links regarding other stuff besides the KGC. I try to please everybody. TreasureNet has a great forum on KGC. If you want to learn more, go to their archives, which you have to have a special link to get to their archives, but that's when all the quote-unquote experts were talking about it. Here's the Ancient Lost Treasures. They have several links, quite a few pages on the KGC. It's quite a hot topic at times. Another one of my forums, basically talking about all kinds of treasure. This is a special group that I have. It's called the Team KGC. There's 50 of us around the United States. We get together, we go out. Lastly, we were out to Oklahoma. We hunt for KGC treasure. That's limited access. Again, get to the home page. You'll never get everything read. By the time you think you've got everything read, I'll be adding more stuff. I'm very easy to get a hold of. I welcome everybody that would want to talk to me, whether it's on KGC or any treasure site that you're working on. I can tell you that I treat your information with high confidence. I'm working with probably, I counted about 8 people in this room right now on different stories. They will never overlap. I will never share your information with another treasure hunter. I appreciate the opportunity of being here today. Thank you.